Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our TPS session, which is focused on how to work with students to help them read handwritten documents when a dwindling number of them have had any formal instruction in cursive up to this point. By the number of us in the room today, I think I can safely say that my gut feeling that this is a growing problem for TPS practitioners must have some truth to it. My name is Jayne Ptolemy. I'm the Associate Curator of Manuscripts at the William L. Clements Library at the University of Michigan. And I'm going to be joined today by three new friends and colleagues at institutions who have similarly been thinking creatively about how do we approach and address this issue. We're each going to spend about 10 minutes just sharing and talking through our various approaches to getting students comfortable with cursive materials, in particular those written in the 18th and 19th centuries. And then we're going to hold time at the end just to hear from all of you in the room. We hope you have questions, that you're willing to share what has worked for you, what your stumbling blocks have been, and then hopefully we can brainstorm together about how we can better support each other moving forward because I don't think this problem is going away. So I personally have the great privilege of working in this exquisite library that specializes in pre-1900 American history. It's undeniably beautiful, both in its architecture and its interior design, but there is no denying that it was built in 1923 to be intentionally intimidating. The doors are heavy. You have to register to use materials. The room is expansive and hushed. It can all just feel a bit much. Throw in materials like these, and you can imagine that it shuts some students all the way off. So our small but mighty team of staff who engage in instruction here have been deliberately working to build lesson plans to help ease those anxieties and welcome students both into the library as a space, but also to the materials that can feel opaque at first glance to encourage them to think of them as possibilities that they can actually really functionally use. We've been at this for a few years now. I'm fortunate to be working alongside our curator of manuscripts and our librarian for instruction and engagement, and we're learning really how to do this as we go. There have, of course, been some definite bumps in the roads, which I suspect many of you here will be familiar with. The perpetual one, of course, being lack of faculty buy-in. If we only can get a single session in their semester, convincing them that taking time to help students read handwriting can be a heavy lift. We've been chipping away at this mostly by working with our tried and true faculty partners who trust us enough to let us give it a shot. So now we have actual examples in our back pocket of what happens when we can scaffold student learning to engage meaningfully with the materials that the faculty want them to consult. So we now have a variety of lesson plans at the ready, ranging from a quick and dirty 10 minutes to a full 3-hour session with proven track records to help make it easier for faculty to say yes when we present them with the option of incorporating this type of lesson plan. Now, of course, that does not help if partners don't intuitively understand that the inability to read handwriting is a real barrier for students learning, either because the faculty doesn't think this skill is exciting as just diving straight into the content and hoping for the best, or maybe they just don't think the payoff is worth the invested time. Now, we could talk all day about that very familiar issue of trying to convince faculty that what we're saying is actually a good idea. But I'm going to spend my time really focusing on the barrier that I find the most fun to tackle, which is the misconception that students have that they simply cannot read handwriting. I can't say how many times I've heard students tell me this when they first walk in the room and see that there's manuscripts on the table. There's like a palpable fear of like, I can't, there's no way I cannot decipher that. But by the end of our time together, they're actually doing a really good job of it. So I kind of see this as a problem of how to get students excited to just give it a shot and to care enough about trying, even when the thing in front of them looks like it's going to be hard. One of the ways that I try to do this is to just spend a few seconds at the very beginning of class emphasizing what they gain by not just relying on someone else to tell them what something says. So for just a few seconds, I'll put something on the screen and compare the transcription against the original thing and ask them to describe the difference. You'll notice in the transcription, they don't show when words are scratched out. There's no way to describe how cramped that page feels and like the visual information that you get. And it really is just a way to try to get them to understand what's at stake for them to actually want to have to try to gain this skill to be able to read the things that are the originals. I also try to emphasize the skills that they already have. 17th century manuscripts and text messages are both simply written records used to communicate across time and space, just made with different technologies and with different cultural contexts. Having a few examples of how they already intimately understand tone or form in familiar digital contexts gets the point across that they already exercise these skills every single day without realizing it. We're just going to be practicing those skills in a different way now, just using the tools that we're going to work through together. But one of my absolute favorite things to do to kind of boost confidence and warm students up is to get them looking beyond the words and thinking about what else they can tell from a handwritten piece. Typically, we'll do that by just running through a couple examples together and just like ask them some very basic questions. So for here, I'll just say, which one do you think was written by someone with less formal penmanship training? Even if you can't read it, you kind of have a gut feeling, right? So what do you notice? Why do you think that? And let's run through a couple of those. So, or which of these two do you think was more heavily used to get students noticing that one has stains and seems to be folded more heavily, and just like thinking about size and the paper and all of those kind of material context clues. It's really about getting them to notice things, to trust that they can see something cool and interesting and relevant, and to really kind of intentionally reduce the intimidation factor to start on the footing that everybody can get some information out of this from the very get-go. Now, there's some interactive activities you can do just focused on that skill. I love to do just a quick 15-minute scavenger hunt where you ask students to just focus on the material aspects of the stuff on the table. This helps them start looking without any pressure to read or understand an entire document right off the bat, which can really be something that can feel overwhelming. So have them looking at this stuff, talking about what they see, getting excited and interesting. And when they report back to the full class, I really take that as an opportunity to really like cheer them on, really play it up, boost their confidence, get really excited about any little thing that they've noticed. And the hope here is that when you then transition to a more content-based activity, even those who might really struggle with reading the handwriting feel like there's still something that they can meaningfully contribute and that they can observe. It's all the better if you can use the same items that you use for the scavenger hunt for more of a reading exercise, since you've already broken the ice, they've already seen this stuff, and you've proven that they know more than they thought they did. But of course, knowing that not all professors are going to give us time in class to do these kind of basic confidence boosting exercises, we've also built a Canvas module that can try to mimic this experience. Again, you'll see that we begin with kind of looking at the thing, not worrying about the reading before we go through the mechanics of reading a manuscript, with the intention of warming the audience up before delving into the harder work of reading for content. We did this by doing kind of multiple choice quizzes where we just ask them to pick between two items. And there's a really great option where you can explain the right or wrong answers so that you know, even if you're not sitting there with the student, what they're kind of taking away from it and what you're trying to draw their eye to. So this has kind of felt like a very parallel experience of trying to focus students on non-written information as a low stakes entry point to minimize that anxiety factor that makes them just automatically say they can't do the thing. When we do transition to reading, I think as many of you, we do focus and start from the very basics and just looking at the cursive alphabet, thinking about how the letters are formed, really thinking about the strokes. But we try to do this in a way to highlight trouble areas that we see people get stuck on over and over again, while also trying to be intentional about inserting a bit of fun to counter boredom and kind of when students start to shut down or their eyes start to glaze over. I like to do this by just focusing on one thing, which is to point out the really super annoying IJT similarities. because, oh, that's something that I struggle with every single day in my job. And we then just kind of try to practice and run through a few examples together. And I just ask them, what do you think? Is that an I, a J, or a T? Now what do you think? Right? Oh, okay. Well, what do you think? I, J, or T? Well, most of the time, half of them are wrong. I, J, or T, and like run through a couple examples. Now, some of this admittedly is just very tongue in cheek to just be like, yep, that's an annoying thing and it absolutely stinks. But really, my intention here is to practice with them about being okay getting it wrong. Because when you're reading handwriting and you're just learning how to do it, you're gonna get it wrong and you just have to keep trying again and again. And it's also about this gives me a chance to tell them to look around the tricky letters to try to figure out the context clues to help you understand it and to not get stuck on the one thing that you're having trouble with, but to let your eyes glaze over and continue to move through it. In our introduction to handwriting at the Clements, we picked out just a few trouble spots to practice together that we know that they're likely going to encounter when we move to the hands-on activity, so that when they sit down with a document, we know there's something familiar they might latch onto. One thing that we kind of point through is abbreviations. I think every 18th and 19th century document, you're likely to see it. But you and your teaching sessions can pick any weird manuscript quirk to spotlight. So again, we show them the little trick of looking for weird punctuation or looking for a weird superscript. But really what we're trying to do here, where it is just about practicing together, it's also about making sure that they have something in their back pocket where they're going to be able to recognize even just one element when they dive into a manuscript themselves so that they can feel in the know about it rather than feeling alienated by it. Then at the very end, before we transition to just letting them loose to give it a shot themselves, I like to just do some rapid fire practice with some fun words to gain momentum, while also, again, spotlighting trouble areas that we're expecting them to encounter. So here, maybe something spelled phonetically to point through, like, yep, like it might not be spelled the way you expect, and don't get hung up on that. Something that shows the long S, or something that we think might just get a little bit of a chuckle. And I always do this so that I can really end by celebrating that they're already doing the thing that we're going to ask them to do. They're reading original, handwritten stuff that spans centuries. And now all we're going to do is try together in person with some different materials. But the final thing, and the one that's probably hardest for me to continue to learn, is that more than anything, the selections we pick really matter. I think it's really hard to resist the impulse to pick that one item that's like so on the nose for what the professor and what the class is about. But sometimes you really just have to pick the thing that you think the students are going to be able to read and digest in the amount of time that you're giving them. So either you're going to have to pick something that isn't quite a close a fit, or you're going to have to scale your activity way, way, way down so that you know that they're going to be able to get through the thing and leave the room feeling like they accomplished something real. Because most of the time, students really can read it once they sit down and give it a shot. It just takes a lot longer than they maybe want it to. It takes being able to and willingness to be wrong and to come back and to struggle through it. And oftentimes that's a question of commitment and a question of encouragement and a question of being willing to try and enjoy it. And a lot of times it just means you just have to try more than once. So more than anything, what I want out of teaching handwriting is just to make students feel like reading cursive can actually be a good time and it's entirely possible to do and you should give it a shot. And for me, that feels like enough of a teaching objective in my books. So I'm going to stop here because I'm really curious to hear what other folks are doing and to be able to make sure we have time to kind of think through different ways of doing that. So I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to ask Sam to talk us through a little bit of what they're doing at their institution.
Sure thing. One moment while I do the share screen shuffle here. All right. Can I get a thumbs up or a confident nod that everyone can see my screen and hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Oh my gosh, I got lots of thumbs up. Wonderful. All right, thank you. So today I am going to be talking to you about I'm going to be giving you a brief introduction to an asynchronous cursive writing tutorial that I created for the Center for Southeast North Carolina Archives and History at UNC Wilmington. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be getting in too much into the nitty-gritty of how I'm teaching cursive or the kind of thought process behind the different things that I included. But my goal here is to just sort of make you aware that this tutorial exists, and hopefully you can go home later today and take a look at it and maybe put it into practice where you are too, or give me some thoughts on it. So I am going to share a link to the tutorial at the end of my slides so that everyone can see it. So our story today begins with me sitting at a table in my reading room next to an extremely exasperated college student, slowly reading out loud a lengthy handwritten letter while she took notes and tried to understand what I was saying. And me wondering how this could have possibly become my job and how I might ever avoid having to do this again. Like most of you, I'm sure, I can confidently state that this is not an isolated incident. I have noticed in both instruction and just in reference interactions in the reading room, UNCW students are increasingly struggling with reading old handwriting, and it certainly seems to be a problem endemic across the profession. So I thought to myself, surely someone has solved this problem by now, right? So I set out to kind of search for some online handwriting tutorials and see what was out there that I could make use of. And I found a lot. There are a lot of, I'm sure you all probably, if you've done any looking into this, will have found a lot of tutorials that are out there that you can use. But what I found, unfortunately, is that pretty much everything at the time when I was working on this was 2023, was very heavily focused on handwriting dating from the 18th century or earlier. Now, UNCW's collections have very little material that dates from prior to the 19th century, and as I'm sure you all know, 19th and 20th century hand looks a lot different than 16th century hand. So I shouldn't say none, most of the information that I was finding in these tutorials was not going to be of interest or relevant to my user community. So I happened to be between projects at the time. I had a little bit of time on my hands, and so I thought, well, maybe I can just try to tackle this problem myself. So I started out by setting some goals for myself. For one thing, I decided I wanted to try and create some sort of video tutorial or some kind of related resource that would be, again, very relevant to our users chronologically speaking, so 19th and 20th century focused. I wanted to come up with a more or less static resource that required very little upkeep after it was created. We are all busy people. I'm a very busy person. I do not have time to just keep updating this and adding to it over time. I wanted to create something using tools that I was already familiar with. Again, citing the lack of time here, I didn't want to be learning a lot of new tools and trying to like figure out how to best manipulate a program to make this happen. Um, and I also really wanted this to be accessible to users beyond the UNCW community, and specifically the UNCW student community, because declining familiarity with cursive handwriting is not just a college student problem, right? Like it's a problem with a lot of different user groups. I also suspected that other archivists out there were having the same kind of experience as me. This presentation today, this session demonstrates that that's true. So I really wanted whatever I produced to be sort of extensible and accessible beyond the UNCW bubble. So I surveyed my colleagues at UNCW Library about what they were doing for this kind of thing. And they told me that they tended to rely on tools like Camtasia, Echo 360, Adobe Premiere, and LibWizard for these kinds of tutorials. And they did a lot of work with Canvas modules and different sorts of things using UNCW's Canvas site. I had never used any of these tools before. And Canvas is not largely accessible outside of the UNCW community, or at least the college student community. And even if it was, I'm not sure just your average community member would know what they were doing with a Canvas module. So I set out to find something else, and I realized that Canva, which I use all the time, has a pretty powerful and user-friendly video editing component. So I decided to go with that, and I made about an 8-minute video tutorial that I ultimately uploaded on YouTube. I supplemented that tutorial with some additional content as part of a larger LibGuide on using and understanding primary sources, which I was simultaneously working on. And those were sort of the tools that I ended up making this available with. Because I wanted to focus specifically on 19th and 20th century handwriting, I had to provide a lot of my own examples from UNCW's collections and do a fair amount of research on the handwriting conventions of those periods. So the project was a pretty hefty time investment for me. I think 40 to 60 hours is probably a low investment if I had to guess. But the good news is that it ended up costing pretty much no money aside from my time that I spent in working on it. It was all done for free, and it should all remain free sort of forever. So this is a screenshot of the LibGuide in its finished state, and it brings together the video tutorial you can see at the top of the screen, along with some resources for further research on historical handwriting, plus some dynamic content like quizzes and flashcards that I incorporated. I think we'll have probably, I'm going to save a couple minutes at the end of my talk here where I'm just going to like actually show you these things, so you'll get a more detailed look at this. But it's done, and I shared it with the sort of UNCW community, with the larger Archibald community, and it's been very successful so far. So I think there is a need that this is meeting. So far, as of last week when I checked, the LibGuide has received almost 13,000 visitors. The video has been watched about 1,300 times, and about 3,500 people have taken the quizzes I created. So it's been a pretty successful venture, and it's probably been worth the effort that I put into it. Like most projects of the size, there are pros and cons to the process, right? So ultimately, I've been pretty satisfied with my decision to undertake this, despite it being a lot of work. It's been, like I said, shared widely beyond our campus, and it's required almost no ongoing upkeep or work to maintain it, which was a goal of mine. And I absolutely love playing around with Canva. I'm sure there's other people in here that feel the same way. So the video at least was really fun for me to make. There are a few drawbacks though. On the one hand, UNCW's LibGuides, in my opinion, are hideous. So it is very aesthetically unpleasing to sort of look at. But you know, I can control what I can control. I'm also not convinced that my core user group, the people I really started out wanting to make use of this resource, UNCW students, I think they're using it, but I don't think it's penetrating, like, you know, the number of people are getting the breadth of reach that I want it to with that particular community. Um, and, you know, sort of lastly, you know, this desire that I had to create something that was very evergreen, that I would never have to touch again, sort of led me to try and be very comprehensive and be very thorough and exhaustive in the information I was trying to provide. So I do think that probably some people may find both the guide and the video a little bit overwhelming. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But overall, very happy with the end result. So I'm going to now, so this is the link. This is a publicly accessible link if you want to write it down or if you want to save it. This should work for everyone here. If you want to get to this tutorial in the future, and I'm going to show you sort of a live view of what this looks like. So here you can see this is part of a larger LibGuide on using and understanding primary sources that I intend to build out with other kinds of like primary source literacy concepts. Right now, it's been sort of slow getting off the ground. So right now, I only have pages on citing primary sources and analyzing correspondence, but I do hope to build this out with things like how to read a newspaper or how to, you know, play a VHS tape or things like that. So future plans. But further down here, so here is the video tutorial that I put together. Again, it's about 8 minutes long. It is broken up into chapters. So if you find yourself wanting to reference this and there's a specific sort of aspect of reading cursive handwriting that your user community is struggling with, you can link to specifically sort of portions of the video. Um, I included some, just sort of quick and dirty references to common abbreviations for things like names, titles, writing conventions. I talk about, how words are commonly abbreviated and how different terms are used to refer to different periods in time, like videlicet or instanta mense, ultima mense, and proxima mense. What do those mean? Like, how does that help you orient yourself chronologically? There are links to quizzes that I put together for people to practice, and these are quizzes using examples from our collections, and they range this is the easiest one, so you can see single words that are more or less fairly easy to read, versus they get all the way up to level 5, which is entire sentences in varying degrees of okay to bad penmanship. So those have been very popular, like I said. I also included things like flashcards and tutorials and quizzes from other sort of parts of the handwriting community. The Folger has a lot of good resources on this, so I've included a couple of their things here. Just some, and then, in addition to this, there's a few more online resources and tools, things like text extractors and sort of AI tools that can help you deciphering cursive handwriting if you, just can't, you want to give up and don't want to do it yourself, different things that you can try. And I did not want to get into too much the weeds of like learning to write cursive in this guide. Maybe that's something I can build out at a future date, but for now, there's just some placeholder like, quick resources that I found either in UNCW Libraries catalog or on the internet about just sort of teaching yourself to write cursive and practicing that way. So, back to my presentation here. So this is my contact info. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about the guide or if you want to use it. I would love to hear if anyone has used it, if anyone's come across it or made use of it. I would love to hear your thoughts on how it can be improved or how it's worked for you or anything like that. So please feel free to share with me today. And that's it for me. And I'm going to hand it over to, I think Mary is next.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm going to share my screen. It's always such an awkward transition, man. All right. Wow. Do you guys see this? Yay. All right. Um, so my name is Mary. I am the archives librarian at the Cooper Union, and I am presenting from sort of a different, I'm farther back in the process than my colleagues here. I'm the first trained archivist here, and I came on only just like 4 years ago. So a lot of new things have been happening, and instruction is one of those things. So we're just sort of figuring out like, what is this going to look like? So if that's you, this presentation is for you. The script in our archives are span from the 1780s to the 2000s. The bulk is in the 19th century. There's all kinds, personal, business, reports, meeting minutes, and all kinds of topics. One thing that I am particularly aware of is that our founder, Peter Cooper, he only really had 1 full year of formal education. So his handwriting and spelling are both atrocious. We also were founded as a free school for men and women of all races and religions, and it was specifically designed for the immigrant community here in Manhattan's Lower East Side when it opened in 1859. So all of our applicants also were not writing like super clearly, not spelling super well. English is often not their first language, going back to the earliest days of our school. So we have a lot of stuff that's not just in cursive, but in a particularly hard to read state of cursive. That said, this kind of makes them extra cool in certain ways. Most of our students can't read script, but also faculty and researchers often can't read script. This can make this a little harder because there's an extra step I have to take in terms of explaining to faculty why this is useful instruction if they are also not doing it. So one thing that I'm thinking about a lot right now is how to articulate why this matters and why it's exciting. I'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, in the next slide. But it's something that I think about a lot is not just communicating this material to students, to teens and 20-somethings, but also to people farther along in their career and their life who might be more sort of stuck in their ideas of what's important. Like me, I'm stuck in my ideas of what's important too, so no judgment there. So why do we care? That's like the big question that I'm trying to make sure I can really explain. Why do we want to read script? Why do we want our students to read script? Why is this worth our time? Why are we doing this? I've gotten as far in articulating this as sort of trying to explain that being able to read script unlocks knowledge and insights that are otherwise unavailable, because much of what was written in the past is difficult to transcribe. Even with AI, there's all these issues. I mean, this is a whole other session to talk about AI issues. But you also can't use AI on stuff that's not digitized. And digitization is expensive. We all have backlogs. There's so much stuff that's not on the internet. And that alone is like a blowing student's mind fact, I often find, where they're like, oh yeah, stuff's not on the internet. So being able to read script can help unlock this whole treasure trove of stuff that other people don't know about, which I think particularly when I'm talking to students who are hoping to get into creative careers, that's something that's really interesting to them because they're like, oh, I can use this to make something that nobody's seen before. And when I say creative careers, our students, we have 3 schools, art, architecture, and engineering. And I would consider all of those creative careers. Our engineers are patenting things. They're trying to make new things, new ways of doing things, just as much as our artists and our architects. I also think there's something sort of soul enriching about learning how to read cursive. And this is the part that I'm really trying to articulate in a way that doesn't sound too oovy groovy. But I do think that learning to read old forms of handwriting can bring us mentally sort of closer to the people of the past, because you're looking at the real way that they really wrote it, how they pressed on the paper. Maybe they had a snack while they were writing and it's a little bit on the page, maybe they were left-handed and they smudged. The fact that Peter Cooper couldn't spell very well, often transcriptions will correct for that. But it's important to know, like, this guy sometimes spelled enough with a PH. Like this was someone who had so little education and yet managed to do some really cool stuff. And that can get lost. And this can help us understand ourselves as part of a continuum of humanity. This image is from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where they unlock a connection to the past by actually meeting Socrates, who is here in a toga and who they call Socrates. But this I think, is a great movie for the archival community, and I hope you've all seen it. And if you hadn't, maybe do, because I think it gives us a few more just pieces of language to talk to students about, like, why this is cool, why this is not just useful but cool, and will not just help your work but also might help you occupy space in the world a little better, which is a big load to put on reading cursive, but that's where we're at. How do I Oh guys, there we go. So what have we done so far? We created a LibGuide. That's as far as we've gotten. It's got advice, resources for reading handwriting, One of those resources you might notice is from Randall Library Center for Southeast North Carolina Archives and History. I put this on here before I even met Sam, and we had a little giggle about it because, of course, it's yours. So yes, archivists are using this. But it does have a note at the end that says, interested in learning more, stop by the Cooper Union Archives to view examples of script or email me to make an appointment. No one has taken me up on this. So I am going to be creating some like a sample lesson plan to present to instructors and try to embed this into some classes. But it is the kind of thing that I think is worth articulating some language and making something cool looking, like a flyer, like a zine. Our students are loving zines these days. I'm sure you guys are experiencing that too. Like something small and tangible that they can look at or take away and say, oh yeah, like this can get me started, and then I can come to Mary to the archives and learn a little bit more. Um, our archives also, I should explain a little bit. You really can just stop by. We're such a small school. We're under 1,000 kids. So I do have like a walk-in policy right now. That might change, but not yet. So the next steps here for me are to work with my colleagues to articulate why reading script is a worthwhile skill. I know I just talked at you guys a lot about that, but I'm continuing to do that, and joining in with this group is part of that effort for me, just like learning from Jayne and Sam and Mandi and anybody else who has questions after this and wants to hash it out together. This is already been fruitful for me, so thank you. We're going to create some internal documentation as guiding principles too. This is like just useful, I found, for me and my colleagues. I'm the only one in the archive, but my library colleagues, we work together on this. And I'm going to start like sneaking in some lessons at the beginning of archival classes that are already happening. This is an idea that I got from my fellow presenters here, and I don't remember which one of you gave me this idea, so I apologize. But I already am doing some embedded archival instruction, as probably most of you are. And I was thinking that a couple ways to do it. I might photocopy a letter and just have everyone go around and sort of read it together, like learning to read elementary school style. You know, everybody takes a sentence or two. We sort of scramble through it. We can play the early American handwriting game as a competition. This is a game that was linked. Oh no. Sorry. This is a game that is linked on the LibGuide down here. And then the other thing we could do is, sorry guys. Or have everyone write the alphabet in script. Just like on old school, like, you know, how we all learned, if you're as old as me, cursive paper from elementary school. This is an idea that Mandi gave me, and she's going to speak next. So I do want to credit her and also pass the baton. Mandi, take it away.
Oh boy. All right. Let me share my screen. All right. Can everybody see what I've got going on here? We're all good? Everybody can see my slides? Lovely. Thank you. All right. So I'm Mandi Shepp. I am the coordinator of special collections and archives at the Daniel A. Reed Library at SUNY Fredonia. We are a small, relatively small, mid-size-ish state campus. There are a lot of variety of documents that we have. We are approaching our campus bicentennial, so we have a pretty varied lot of handwritten documents and things. in our collection here. So here are some examples of things in our collection. We have a lot of history faculty that were really eager to incorporate handwritten primary sources in their classes. And after the first session, we learned pretty quickly that students were not exactly prepared for this, as my colleagues have expressed in this session. There are at the first class session, I started in 2018, so my first instruction year was in 2019. So I started a lot of our sessions with questions of like, hey, how can we incorporate primary sources? Let's do this. Let's try stuff. I've got all these great archival collections. You have cool history students. Let's see what we can do. And the first class session went exactly as has been described by a few of my colleagues here, and probably some of you have experienced. It was me and the faculty reading a lot of things to students while they frantically transcribed them on their laptops or in their notebooks, which is not exactly the most fun experience for me or the faculty or for the students. It's kind of hectic and frantic. Over the semester, this pattern kind of appeared across all the learning levels. We were seeing this in 200 level classes. We were seeing this in 400 level classes. So my second semester, I was like, all right, let's see what we can do about this. So I started with trying to match students with their adaptation. I'd begin the class session with kind of a survey of how many of you have been exposed to cursive, what's your comfort level with cursive, what makes sense to y'all to work with. About half of them did not really receive cursive instruction in K through 12 beyond the basic alphabet and creating a signature. So that's the experience that I have been told about, is a lot of them learn how to make their signature and then that's it. Of the remaining half, about half of them had received full cursive instruction the way that I did in school, where you can't use a pen until you can write in cursive, stuff like that. So it was a little bit difficult to kind of match those levels. And then the other half had not received any sort of formal cursive instruction at all. So it was a big mix of people, and trying to match that was kind of challenging, but we kind of rolled with it. Found better handwriting for students that had less comfort, gave the more difficult documents to the folks that had more comfort, but still it wasn't quite right. So my third semester, I started on let's start with basics then. If no one knows how to do cursive, let's teach you how to do cursive. Let's see how this all works, guys. So we had an embedded class that was focused on local history. So it was a lot of local documents, things like that, a lot of handwritten founders documents, and people from varying education levels across the county. Chautauqua County, where I am, is where Welch's is founded. So we have some very fancy, prestigious grape juice related documents. And then also like local farmers and things that did not receive the most education on the planet, and their writing and spelling is atrocious, as many of my colleagues have also relayed. So starting the session, I'm going to kind of roll through what I did with students. We started with a review of penmanship style examples. So here we have examples of the formal styles like Spencerian and Potter script, as well as Palmer style, and then the basic McGuffey's script. So just showing that there is this immense variety of education levels and handwriting styles in the English language, and that it's not really a boilerplate standard experience of handwriting, because most people expected cursive to look the same no matter what, which was a really interesting revelation to me. They all assumed cursive is cursive is cursive, and that's not the case. We know that as archival practitioners. Some people have bad handwriting, me included. So after that, we rolled into, all right, we all know the alphabet. Let's learn the cursive alphabet. It's going to be super fun. So they received, I wrote out on the whiteboard a big cursive alphabet demonstration, much like the one pictured here. Everyone got a handout of this cursive alphabet. And then I got a packet of like the grade school handwriting paper, the lined paper that's pictured in this image, and we wrote the actual alphabet out. And had everyone kind of go through that had never had the experience doing that. Most folks found that really fun. Fredonia is a historic teacher education college. We've been training teachers since 1826. So that's kind of a part of it, is a lot of these folks are ed majors that if they haven't experienced cursive instruction, a lot of them do not know how to incorporate it into their own pedagogy and their own lessons. So this was sort of an eye-opening experience for future teachers, which I thought was neat and something I did not expect at all. So once we got comfortable with the alphabet, I kind of gave them some pointers. These were the pointers that I provided, finding a key letter to kind of match to the handwriting style and figure out what letters are weird and what letters aren't. Reading it out loud phonetically. Try writing it in cursive on your own so that you can see maybe what they're thinking in the writing. And then, the super fun time that everyone has with the cursive letter S, because it can look like so many things, and some people just get real crazy with it. It can be very loopy, very, very sassy, very capital letter E. And that really throws folks off, especially when you get the long S in there. My students have all come to appreciate the long S, the ones that work with me in the archives. Not so much the history students. They do not understand why that needs to be a thing. So after that, I did an in-class activity. I took handwritten sentences. I kind of had this weird idea of, hey, let's practice. How can I get them to look at all of the letters of the alphabet? Because everyone gets comfortable and then someone throws in a Z and they're like, what is that? So it's a little challenging to kind of make everything work in that way. And kind of the best way is exposure, exposure, exposure. So looking at different letters, different handwriting styles. So I took pangram sentences. I had a list of them that I had printed out and went around to different folks in the library, different members of faculty, different staff, student workers that had comfort with cursive and were really, really excited to participate. And everyone picked a pangram sentence and wrote it. And that's how I created this handout. One of our librarians is a very, very fancy person and knows both Spencerian and Palmer cursive. So he has formal handwriting and regular cursive. So he's got both of his on there. Some are students, some are mine. It was a really interesting exercise to see how many different varieties of cursive handwriting come out of a group of 10 modern people. So it was really, really interesting in that. The students had a lot of fun with this because it made them more comfortable with bad handwriting as well as really immaculate handwriting, and seeing it in a modern context that was not on a piece of historical fragile paper that is itself a scary object because of its fragility. That made things a little bit easier. I have heard really wonderful feedback from this. Students overall were much more confident with their handwritten materials after this. It freed myself and the history faculty in classes to answer more questions about the materials or the collections, rather than standing there and acting as interpreters for everything. We also got a lot of positive context comments, like I said previously, from the education majors that didn't know how to handle this stuff in classes or show students how to contact or how to interpret these materials now, or how to even do cursive writing. And it honestly showed a bit of a deeper connection from students to the materials that were in front of them. Once they could read this person's handwriting and understood, like, oh, their handwriting is not great because they have only received education up to 6th grade. And they are a farmer and handwriting is not really their priority. So it it allows people to really see more of what's in front of them in a goofy cosmic way. And I really, it was wonderful to see them actually engage with the materials like I intended them to. So these are some examples of what we have. I will say I started this first class session with this written activity in the spring of 2020. The first handwritten interpretation session was it was about a week before the 2020 lockdown started. So I immediately had to flip this to a virtual format as soon as I made it. Which did honestly work. It was pretty easy to flip over. The handwriting things were easy to kind of send out as PDFs for virtual assignments. And then I could open up this interpretation activity to wider digitized collections, things that we didn't necessarily have here, maybe find some better examples from other collections that are more reflective of what I'm trying to show. So cool. I still offer this session in both a full and abridged form, and I've kind of modified some primary source instruction sessions to begin where we have handwritten. If we're using handwritten materials, I still start with the survey. I still try and match objects to level of comfort. But we also have this ability now to, if we need to go further and do handwriting, or we need to add another session and learn how cursive works, we have that freedom built in. But if there's a level of comfort where I can just do a 10-minute quick and dirty basics of cursive and proceed, we can do that too. So it's a nice modular format for this kind of instruction that I really like. The other thing is that a lot of our materials at Fredonia are in European languages. We are the North American repository for the papers of Stefan Zweig. So we have a ton of materials in German. We have a lot of Jewish exile collections, so lots of European languages, lots of cursive. And you assume fancy European authors have fancy European handwriting. Oh, no, no. Most of their intellectual, beautiful handwriting is so sloppy, so bad, so tiny, so crunched. So this is some postcards that have varied writing on them within the Zweig collection. German cursive is its own animal because you also get German shorthand, different varieties in German cursive. So having this understanding when you have the language barrier added to it really makes sense because students can get more comfortable with the handwriting, and that kind of allows them to interpret it easier or seek Google Translate in a more easy way if they kind of understand the letters that are in front of them. The other thing that this helped with immensely and was an unexpected, unintended consequence, we have a lot of materials that are printed in Fraktur and Breitkopf fracture fonts because German language materials, things like that. This half script, half print is a particular bugbear for most of my students because the faculty love it. It creates beautiful documents that are lovely to look at and so hard to read. So, unless you really have a familiarity with it. So to not put a bunch of my materials in timeout preemptively, having this session in an abridged format really helps students understand what these documents are in front of them too. That is what I have for me. If anyone is interested in a copy of my Pangram sentences handout, I will find a way to stuff it into the TPS files for our session so that can be distributed. And if anybody has questions, please let me know.